Okay, first thing we're going to start with is fitting the PCBs to the bottom plate. As you can see here, I've stuck insulation tape onto the bottom. I do this just in case, because carbon is conductive. If any of the traces break through, then they could short and damage your components. So apply insulation tape to all of the PCBs that are going to be attached to the bottom plate. So that includes this Bluetooth module as well. We're going to be attaching that to the bottom plate. So just out of safety, put insulation tape on the bottom. We're now going to pop out this little plastic part that goes inside the connector. That's just to keep it nice and safe. So we're going to start with the 20mm long M2 bolt. Should only be one of those in your hardware bag, and that's going to go on the back right of the bottom plate, just here by the alpha gel. Then we can put this PCB on using that hole and then fit a standoff. Now there's two different sizes of standoffs, a short one and a long one, if you want to call them that. The short ones are made to go on top of PCBs, whereas the longer ones are for where there aren't PCBs using the same bolt. So we're going to use this small one for now, and that goes straight on top of the PCB over that bolt. And then you're just going to take one of the M2 nuts and screw that on, just hand tight for now. That's so that you can pick up the bottom plate and move it around without the bolts falling out the bottom. Then I'm going to take one of these little 6mm bolts that goes through here, just where this big hole is, where the fan goes. So you just put an M2 nut on there, and with these 6mm bolts, where it's not using a standoff as well, you might as well go ahead and tighten that one down all the way. As I said, yeah, putting the nut on loose just stops them from falling out the bottom for now. So we're going to fit this front PCB using 2 bolts and 2 standoffs. And these will just be the 16mm M2 bolts. So I put the first one through there, one of the smaller standoffs on top, and then an M2 nut on top of that just to hold it in place. And then the same thing towards the front there, M2 16mm with a standoff and a nut to hold it in place. So now we can fit the Bluetooth. You're going to fit it this way round with the FFC, the ribbon connector facing outwards. I'm going to go with the 6mm bolt to start with. So that just goes through here and through the PCB on the inside. And same as the last one, we're going to put an M2 nut on and actually tighten it all the way up. Sometimes these nuts catch, sometimes you have to use a driver. Now I'm going to put this M2 16mm through, another small standoff, we've got one left, there it is, and then an M2 nut on top of that just to hold it in place again. Yeah, sometimes these nuts you don't need to use a driver, sometimes you do. This one I do, so I'm just going to go ahead and tighten down that one that doesn't use a standoff. just double check that one's tight, which it is. That leaves 2 more holes that need the 2 longer standoffs in place. So just going to go ahead and fit those. Using M2 nuts again to hold them in place, so you can see if I didn't do that, this would be really difficult because all those bolts would keep falling out all the time. Now we have the bottom plate and bottom plate PCBs assembled. We can move on to the next stage. Okay, so we're going to go around now and fit all the ribbon cables that are going to connect these PCBs to the Blackmagic main board. We'll start with this one here, which is a 22 pin ribbon cable. It's the only one that actually sends the ribbon cable inward bound rather than out. So you're going to have to bend it over like so to plug it in. That keeps it, it's just because there's not a lot of room there, and it keeps the cable nice and tight. Next up, we're going to fit this one where it's contacts on the same side. This is a 10 pin 50mm ribbon cable. So this connects the front board to the rear board and sends functions and the green LED to the other board. It also sends power to the fan. So yeah, these can be a little bit fiddly, but it's not too difficult. It's a little bit of slack, so just run your finger along like that and fold it over, and it will lie down nice and flat. I think maybe in the final one there'll be slots there that you can use a zip tie to hold that down as well. But you could tape it as well, insulation tape will work. Moving on to the tally light now, so that's an 8 pin 50mm ribbon cable. That just pops in so like that, and then that will go up to the main board when we fit that. Next up we have the 30 pin ribbon cable that has opposite side contacts. You see how it has blue on one side and one end and not blue on the other. Next up we're going to fit this Bluetooth ribbon cable. Now I'll have to stop here and just actually admit that this is not the correct cable. So I'm actually recording this audio after the fact, and it should be a same side. The contact should be on the same side, not opposite sides like I fitted here. Okay, moving on, we're going to fit the buttons that go in the rear panel. This uses a 10 pin ribbon cable, but it's 100mm in length. Just going to fit one end to it here on the little button PCB, and then we're going to fit those buttons to the rear I/O panel. So this is the rear I/O panel. You can see here there's the port, there's a hole there for your screen extension, your record button. There's also cutouts there for HDMI and USB-C. We're going to use these parts here, the button and the diffusers, and fit all those together. So starting with the record button, you're going to want to take the nut off the back and feed the button through the hole. Put the nut on the other side and start threading it. Make sure you don't cross thread it because there is plastic going into metal. Once you've started threading it in, you can actually pull the button outwards and the nut will fall into a recess on the inside and grip it and make it really easy to screw it all the way in and tighten it up. So no need for glue or anything like that. That rubber seal on the outside helps keep it nice and tight. Give that a quick test. Right, next up we are going to fit the diffuser. So you can see on the diffuser, it's not just a block rectangle, one of the edges has been chamfered off. That's to match the edge of the rear I/O. So fit the diffuser so that the chamfered edge matches the chamfered edge of the rear I/O panel, and it should be a pretty tight fit, no need for glue, just squeeze that in and it should go in nice and flat and be nice and smooth. Next up, get the little plastic buttons and drop those in like so, and then take the button PCB and that fits over the buttons and holds them in place, and we're just going to use two little screws to fix the PCB to this rear I/O panel. Just slide the PCB so that the holes line up. You can see there's a semicircle in the PCB and a semicircle in the print, so they should line up nicely so that these screws just drop in and tighten up and hold it in place. Give the buttons a quick test, make sure they're all working. And that's the rear I/O panel finished and ready to fit to the bottom plate. So actually going to have to fit the two rear 20mm standoffs now so that we can get the rear I/O fitted. So one 20mm standoff there, another 20mm standoff in here. Now we can take the rear I/O panel and we're just going to slot it over the top of the screen extension connector and over the standoffs obviously, and it should just drop down and fit, and it's going to hold the PCB in place and the port in place, and then we can plug that ribbon cable into the final connector that's left. Like so. And we're going to do the same thing again because there's a little bit of slack there. All you do is just run your finger along so that it's nice and flat across the main part of it, and then bundle it up at the end. Once the PCB is fitted, it's actually going to hold all that down, but one little thing I like to do is just add a bit of tape here. That just holds it in place while we're fitting the PCB so it isn't popping up and getting in the way all the time. The audio jacks actually hold that down in place. Okay, so that's all the ribbon cables now fitted to the bottom plate and the bottom plate PCBs, and yeah, we can move on to the next stage really. Right, I've prepared my little fan here and cut the cables to length. Here's the TPU print that's going to fit inside, and the two wires that I'm going to run to the record button. There's a little notch in the TPU print where the cables go through, and you're going to want that nearest to those to that PCB. So it fits in the bottom. It shouldn't be too difficult to get in. Just squidge it in. It's got a little slot where the carbon will fit inside, and then you can just drop the fan in place like so, and push the cables in through the little slot. Now, hooking those cables in underneath is going to hold it in place quite tightly, but it's also advised to put a bit of double-sided foam tape inside. That's just going to hold the fan in place a lot better as well. We're going to be running the wires down to here. The ground for the record button is shared with the fan, so there's only 3 pads needed. I'm going to go ahead and solder the fan up now. So this one will be sending direct voltage, so if you're running it on 2S, the fan is a 12-volt fan, so it's not going to really spin very much. So you're going to have to use a 3S LiPo or a BEC to get the maximum benefit out of the fan. So I've tinned those up now. Now I'm going to solder the positive to the far left pad. That's going to be sending, as I said, direct whatever you're powering your black magic off, that'll be getting sent to that fan as well. I'm going to solder the ground to the middle pad there. Wouldn't worry about doing it too carefully because we're going to be soldering on the record button pads as well. So grab one of the wires that you're going to send to the record pad and solder that on at the same time. Then take the other wire and solder that onto the far right pad labelled rec. Now what I like to do with the two wires is twist them together just so they're not so flapping around so much. Just keeps them nice and tidy. You don't need to do it for any interference issues or anything like that. It's just to keep the two wires together so that we can run them up to the record button nice and neat and tidy. In the final version there's actually going to be a couple of slots in this top plate to hold the cable in place, but for now we're just going to stretch this wire across, line up how much wire we need and trim off the excess. Then all we need to do is tidy this up a little bit, and then we'll be tinning these and soldering them directly onto the back of the button. It's just going to tin up the back of the button here. Doesn't matter which wire goes to which of these terminals. It's just making a connection between the two which triggers the black magic to start recording. So as I said, just going to solder those directly onto the back of the button. Probably would have been easier to just do this before fitting the button maybe. Right, so just going to tidy up that cable a little bit. So there you go, just pretty simple, just solder those two wires onto the back of the button, tidy up the cable, and yeah, as I said, the final one's going to have a couple of slots for putting a zip tie on, just to hold that in place so it's not flapping around. Or yeah, for now I'm just going to use a bit of tape like before, just to hold that in place. Now we'll move on to the front PCB here and do the switch and XT30. Sorry, I didn't record the first little step of this. So these switches use 2 pins, and the center pin of a switch is what's sending out whatever you put into the top of the switch. So we're going to be sending voltage into the top pin and out of the center pin straight into the black magic. So you solder up that one pad directly to the center pin, and then solder on the Molex connector that goes to the black magic to the back of the pad, like so. Then with the XT30 we're going to be running as I said, the positive is going to be going to this top pin here. So then when we flick the switch, it takes the positive from the power from the power input, sends it through the switch, goes out of that middle pin straight into the black magic, and then we'll be soldering up the ground of the LiPo lead directly to the ground pad on the front PCB. So just a basic power switching mechanism, but trying to keep it as neat and tidy as I can. So we're just soldering up the ground of the XT30, and then soldering on the ground of the Molex connector that goes to the black magic, just soldering that to the back of the pad. Sorry, that wasn't on shot. So as you can see here, we got positive coming in from the LiPo, going in the top of the switch, and then coming out of that center pin of the switch straight into the black magic, and then using the Molex connector to connect it up to the black magic itself. Then the ground from the XT30 going straight to the ground pad, and the ground of the Molex going to the black magic. Okay, you can see here on this 4K PCB that there's this extra piece of metal here. That's to protect some of the components and used in the way it fits into the case. It's connected to the PCB here, 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 and here. Now it's actually soldered in, but we're going to remove it by using these cutters. So if you've bought a 4K kit, it's going to come with these cutters, and we're going to remove the plate like this, so you're left with one without the plate. You need to take some caution here, because around where this plate connects to the PCB are some really tiny components. So when removing this, you just got to be extremely careful not to knock any of the components off. At the front part there where the ports are, it's easy. So that's where we're actually going to start. So take your snips, and quite easy to just snip through here. This one can be a bit more tricky. Sometimes you can get the snips underneath, but sometimes it's easier if you lift up the corner. So you can just pull up the corner with your fingers. It's quite soft metal. That allows you to get the snips in and break that second one free. Now we can move this. Don't immediately pull it all the way back, because you'll see that the way the metal's been folded, you'll be pulling that metal back into a bunch of components. So these two bits of metal that go down into the PCB need to be straightened out. So just pull the metal out towards you, and you can flatten that out. You can see here where I've done it, and it's going straight up. That's so that when we're wiggling the piece of metal about or cutting it, we're not going to hit any of those components. You can see this, yeah, there's those components that are really close to it. But now that it's pointing straight up, we can just hold the PCB with one hand and wiggle the piece of metal backwards and forwards, and it's such a thin piece of metal where it's connected to the PCB that it'll eventually just snap, usually on the right hand side. There we go. So you can see now we've broken that one free. Now still be careful, because there's that bit of metal on the right hand side that's now sticking down, and as you move the metal around, that could ping off some components. In fact, I'm just going to grab that end with the pliers and bend it up out of the way, so there's no chance of it pinging off any of the components. And yeah, this final one is the trickiest one to get off. So just take your time, look when you bend the metal, look exactly where the rest of the metal's going, make sure you can move it around where it's not hitting any components. You can even lie it flat like this and twist it. That's usually the way to just get it to go, the last little bit. There you go. This one was a little bit trickier because it had a lot of silicon conformal coating on it, but there we go, we've managed to get that plate off. As I said, that's only something you have to do with the 4K. The 6K, the metal doesn't get in the way. Okay, so now we're going to fit this PCB to all the bottom plate stuff that we prepared earlier. You're going to want to try and remove all these nuts without the bolts falling out the bottom. Can be a bit tricky, but keep the bottom plate on a flat surface, and then that surface will hold the bolts in place. Now we can take the PCB and fit it to those bolts on top of the standoffs. And you're going to have to feed it in with the port side first. So just take your time and go around and line up all the M2 bolts with the holes and drop it into place. I knew I would forget to get that ribbon cable out first, so I'm actually going to have to lift that end up slightly so I can get to that with my tweezers. So you're going to want to pull that ribbon cable out, ready to plug in. Well, in fact, we can just plug that in now. Like so, there we go. Put the clip down. Put that power connector in place as well. And then we're going to put the tally light in as well. Now, annoyingly, my design wasn't 100% perfect, so this doesn't just go straight in. We're actually going to have to 180 it. So you just flip it over and plug it in like so. Put the clip down. I'm not going to fit the Bluetooth or the screen ribbon cables just yet because there's bolts that need to go in first and another PCB. So just going to go around and fit the bolts back and do them up. Well, it's actually just easier to go around and fit all the bolts hand tight and tighten them all up at the end. There's these two bolts here that need other parts fitted to them first. So we're going to fit this screen extension PCB to the main board of the Blackmagic. That lines up with this hole and the bolt that's popping up, so it's really easy to fit. Just pop that in place and then fit the ribbon cable to it, and then we can take one of the M2 bolts and fit that on top. That just helps hold that PCB in place so it can't come out, and the foam tape on the bottom just keeps the pressure nice and even. So I'm going to take the 4K sensor and fit the sensor cable to the main PCB like so. And yeah, that Bluetooth cable is going to have to go on the other side so that it can plug into there, but we need to do the bolt up first. There's a little metal plate that goes across and holds the sensor cable in place, so just going to drop that in place and fit one of the M2 nuts. And try and tighten that up a bit. Again, these don't have to be super tight right now because we can, once they're all in place, we can go around and tighten them all up. This nut here is the most important one. You don't want to tighten this one nut all the way down because it can disconnect the PCB. So you just want to tighten it up enough that it grips the PCB and holds it in place, but make sure you don't over tighten it. If you can see that the connector isn't parallel, if the PCBs aren't parallel with each other, then it means that you've tightened it up too much. You need to back it off a little bit. You can give it a little turn with your hand and make sure if it's tight or not. Then just go around all the other ones you can do up nice and tight. So get a driver on the back and your socket driver on the front and go around and tighten those up. Now when fitting this Bluetooth ribbon cable, just remember that the cable that I'm using here is the wrong one, and actually you need to 180 this ribbon cable, so it should come out flat, and you need to flip it over so that the blue is on the outside. Don't plug it in with the pins facing up, only plug it in with the pins facing down, like I have here, but because the cable's different, you'll actually have to 180 that. But just go around and make sure that all your ribbon cables are plugged in and all your clips are done up. Attach a 3S LiPo and flick the power switch. You should have a green LED light up on the back. That means that it's powered up. You should also hear your fan going. Plug in a card and hit the record button, and you should see that the light changes colour, so it's red in the middle to tell you that it's recording. And voila, success! The hardest bit of the whole build is over. It's all powering up and recording as it should do. We can move on to the next stage. Right, so we're going to have to build the sensor case now. Uses these two nylon 12 parts and a carbon fiber plate, and these 2.2mm self-tapping screws that go through the prints and through the carbon fiber and through the lens attachment and hold the whole thing together. So the outer print fits into the carbon fiber like so. You just slide where the button mechanism is, you just slide that into the slot. Then we're going to take your UV filter and make sure that it has the glasses closest to the bottom. Fit that into the inner part like so. Now we're going to construct the lens attachment on the front. So you're going to fit the tiny little spring inside the hole like this, and then we're going to take this spring steel ring, and you can see how it has these little bits that dip down. You need those on the bottom, and then it has this circular cutout part here where the button goes, and we're just going to fit. And there's also a small hole with a little bit, I've got a little lug that goes up and actually holds it in place, so there is only one way that you can fit this. You're then going to take the pin and balance that on top of the spring like so. Then you're going to take the actual button itself and line up the outer ring so that the hole for the pin to go through is in the right place. Take your button, and so the flat part is on top, and then in one motion you're really going to just hook the button onto the pin and then drop the ring on top with the pin going through the hole like so, and it should just drop into the slot and the button will be working as intended. So now that the ring is in place and holding the button there, we're going to have to fit these self-tapping screws. So we're not going to put these all the way through for now, we're just going to have them so that they go through to the other side. So you could put your finger on the other side and feel for it to come through, or just have a look and you can see there it's just popping through. Now, doing all of this while holding the ring in place. So we're just going to work our way around and fit all 4 of these self-tapping screws. Just enough so that the tips are poking through the other side. Then we'll fit the inner print on the other side and it'll all screw in together. Okay, so just double check the button's working, make sure all the self-tapping screws are poking through the carbon, and while holding the ring in place, just take the inner part with the UV filter fitted. These 2 prints together, when they screw together, will be holding that UV filter in place. So it just slots onto the back like so, and while holding the whole thing together, finish off screwing in the self-tapping screws. They screw into that inner plate and the whole thing is all squeezed together. Watch those little bits sticking out the back, don't want to pull them off. Just get this final one in, and the whole lens assembly now is finished. As you can see, the filter's really dirty, so I'm going to give that a clean. But yeah, don't worry about that, you can always clean it after before fitting the sensor. Double check the button's working. It's all lined up nicely. That's ready to check the focus and to adjust the shims. Right, now I'm going to show you the differences between the 4K and the 6K sensor cases. So I've got a 6K sensor case here, and it's the same thing, you know, it's got a shell, 2 pieces of carbon either side, and it's got these 3 mounting registry points that line up with the carbon plate. So you still slide it in at the button, but then those 3 little registration points should just drop into the carbon plate like so. So you can see that the outer print doesn't go over the edge of the carbon on the inside like the 4K does. That's because the UV filter, there's just not enough room. So it's just like my old 6K where the UV filter is actually just fitted to the outside. Then I'm going to take this inner part, which has this ring that goes up through the carbon fibre to create a light-proof seal. That just drops in like so, and then the filter goes in the middle. Just like before, you fit the lens attachment to the outside, so drop the spring in, drop the pin in, put the outer ring in, and then these 4 points are used to use the self-tapping screws all the way through and attaches to the inner print, and then you fit the whole thing to the sensor shell before fitting the back plate to the sensor shell. So I figured I might as well show you how I clean my sensors, and my UV filters. I take 2 of these little spatula type cleaning tools. They're actually part of a sensor cleaning kit. Keep one dry and one wet. Apply some of the sensor cleaning fluid to one of them and go around the UV filter like so. Then take the dry one and use it to dry up all the moisture and while cleaning. Do the same thing on the other side. So use the wet one to clean off all the grime and get all the sensor fluid all over it. And then rather than waiting for it to evaporate and leaving watermarks, get the dry one and go around and dry it off. That's exactly the same thing that I do with my sensors as well. Okay, so moving on to the shims, and this is going to be the same for the 4K or the 6K. You get 2 as standard all the time, a 0.3 and a 0.5, and then you always get some extra ones. The way I've designed it is that you should just have to remove either the 0.5 or the 0.3 shim. Usually it's the 0.3, so we're going to remove the 0.3 shim now and fit the 0.5 and the 0.18, which was the extra one. So take the lens attachment that we made earlier and just drop the shims on the back using the little pins to line them up. Then the easiest way to do this is to get your sensor ready. We're just going to flip it over and fit it onto the sensor mount, like so. So just line up the pins with the holes that the pins go through and push that on. You should feel the rubber go around the inner print. We're then going to take our 10mm M2 bolts and secure the sensor to the sensor mount. So the sensor mount has got threaded inserts on the inside, so there's no self-tapping. Once we've got the shimming perfect, we could use Loctite so that it never comes loose and you never have to adjust it. Sometimes over time the screws can come loose unless you're using some sort of thread and Loctite system like this. And during travel and transportation they could vibrate loose as well, so yeah, far more secure way of mounting the sensor to the sensor mount on the V2. So just go around and make sure they're all nice and tight. No need to over tighten them, just nice and tight. Plug in your monitor and get your lens. I'm using my Laowa 7.5mm. So fit the lens to the lens mount and set the aperture as wide open as possible, so 2, and set the focal distance to infinity. I'm going to go ahead and power on my monitor and the camera now. I'm just going to adjust my ND filter so the exposure is good, and on the other side of the room, if I zoom in a little bit here, on the other side of the room you can see I've got this picture on the wall there. That's what I use for adjusting my focus. So when it's wide open and set to infinity, you should be able to focus on, you should be getting the focus lines on things that are about 5 meters away. And as you can see, this one is this is actually perfect. So right on infinity, I'm getting focus on that painting on the wall. As soon as I turn the lens down from infinity, it goes out of focus, and even when I go to the far end just past infinity, it goes slightly out of focus as well. So this is perfectly focused to infinity, which is really important, especially with the 6K. A lot of people out there don't realize just how important it is to adjust the shims so that infinity is dead on infinity. Otherwise you're going to just get blurry edges and not understand why the picture's all fuzzy. It's simply because you haven't focused it properly. So with this latest kit, it should be really easy to focus it dead on infinity, or at least just get it within a small amount. If you were hitting focus and focusing on that painting on the wall, and your lens was set just before infinity, that means that you need to add some shims. So in that case you would use the 0.3 that you've removed and take out some of the small ones that you get as extra. And the other way, if you were turning it to infinity and still not able to focus, it means that you've got too many shims in there, and that's when you could take out the 0.5 and drop in the 0.3. That would be reducing it by 0.2 and bring it back to a position that you would be able to set as infinity. As I said, generally speaking, you should just be able to remove the 0.3 and hit infinity focus with the extra shims that they include. So now that that's all focused to infinity, we're going to fit it to the sensor case. So we're just going to drop in these 20mm standoffs. That's what's going to be holding the carbon plates together. Now we're going to have to remove the sensor from the sensor mount to actually fit it to the case. And like I said earlier, this would be when you would Loctite the sensor in, because it should be the last time you're fitting it to the case. I hadn't actually fitted this little clip, so I'm just going to fit this clip now. Okay, so take the lens mount and sensor mount part on the carbon, fit that to the sensor case like so. Use 4 of the countersunk M3 bolts to hold the carbon in place. Now that that's all fitted to the sensor case, we can go back and refit the shims that we already know get us to infinity get us to infinity focus. So refit the shims, and just like before, we're going to flip over the sensor and fit it to the back of the sensor mount, only this time it's a little bit more tricky because it's got to fit down inside the sensor case. This is why I generally do the shimming outside of the actual main shell of the case, just because it's a lot easier to remove and refit each time as you're adjusting the shims. Just so happens that I hit infinity perfectly on this time, so probably didn't need to. But yeah, this would be I'm not doing it on this one because it's my personal one, and I might need to remove this and fit it to something else if I make changes. So I'm not going to be using Loctite. I don't travel and send my cameras all over the place, so it's never going to come loose anyway. But this would be a good stage to put a bit of Loctite inside the threaded inserts, or put it right on the end of the screws just before you're fitting them. That way this sensor's never going to come loose and you're never going to have any problems with having to refocus it. So go around and make sure they're all nice and tight. And that's the sensor now fitted to the sensor case, and we can move on to well, we can fit the back plate and fit the top plate. As you can see, the sensor cable is going to fold over like this, and then that's how it goes up vertically into the sensor. So for now I'm just going to leave it like that and prepare the top plate and then put the sensor on top. So we've got the top plate here, and we're going to fit these 4 parts. So we've got these 2 that are for mounting the sensor to the top plate. They're fitted with press nuts that you want on the inside, and then these 2 parts are used for mounting the struts. Might as well go ahead and fit the back plate to the sensor case as well now. So it's a lot easier to do while it's not fitted to the top plate. Okay, so the sensor mounts and the strut mounts are all fitted to the top plate using countersunk screws, and they screw into the press nuts on the underside of the carbon. Then we can just feed the sensor cable through the top plate like so, and fit the sensor into the sensor mounts and fit the top plate in place. Now there's 2 struts, there's one with a hole in, that's for the switch, and one without a hole in, that's for the side without the switch. So go ahead and take the one without the hole in and fit that to the top plate. That slots into the bottom plate and into the top plate. Then we screw it in place with this bolt. That screws through the strut and into the strut mount. On the other side we're going to be having the switch fitted, and you're going to need to fit the switch before the strut. So take the switch cover, this little black part, and while holding the switch on the other side, go ahead and screw that into the strut. Now that the switch is fitted to the strut, we can fit the strut to the top plate. So again, just slot it into the bottom plate. Should be a nice snug fit, and then push it into the side plate and use a bolt to secure the strut to the top plate. Should look like that. And the top plate's all nice and flush. And you've got the strut nice and flush into the bottom plate. The whole of the thumb screws are going to go through is lining up nicely. Just check that everything's all nice and clean and all lining up nicely, and that your XT30 is coming out nice. And yeah, just to make sure that the sensor case doesn't go flying, go ahead and chuck a thumb screw in. Now's a good time to go around and fit the M3 8mm bolts to the top plate, securing the whole top plate, sensor mount and struts to the rest of the camera. Don't forget the 18mm button bolts that go through the bottom of the sensor into the sensor mounts, and screwing to the press nuts on the other side. Okay, so now I've got that final bolt in. That's it, all the bolts are in, everything's all lined up nicely. We've already tested that it powers up. Just double check that all the buttons are nice and free and that the HDMI and USB slot are all lined up. And yeah, everything's looking good. I'll show you what it looks like with the lens attached here. So go ahead and attach that, and there you have it. There's the naked BMPCC4K V2 ready to go. Well, need to fit some battery straps obviously. Probably just going to be going for 2, but you can fit 4, so one there, one there, one there, one there, so you could run 2 lipos. You could also do toilet tank with 2 straps and run one sideways on the back. Maybe you got some really wide packs or something, and when you get the angle back it could be hitting the lipos if you do it in the normal way. So just another option anyway. Then of course the standard way of just running one lipo with a strap through there and a strap through there. That's how I'm going to be doing it. I run a separate lipo, so I'll be having my 3S lipos attached on the top, but obviously if you were running a back you could just run it on the bottom like so. And yeah, there you go, that's it, it's as simple as that. I hope you all have fun building this new kit. This just give you a quick look at the 6K here, and you can see how the UV filter just fits on the outside like that. but it's essentially the same, other than the sensor mount, and the struts and the sensor cable. They're the only thing that's different with the V2. Both can be fitted with these front doors, but yeah, both essentially the same, apart from the sensors being different, which is the same as the actual cameras themselves. So yeah, that's what the naked BMPCC6K-E V2 looks like. Okay, so finally I better show you how to build one of these awesome screen extensions like I have here. Really simple. Got the screen surround print here, and we're just going to take the screen PCB and posi driver, and just going to fit these two small button head self-tapping screws, one in there and one at the bottom here. Then we're going to take this outer protective part that goes, it's like a little cover that goes over the socket here. You should remove the plastic bit from the inside of the socket, unlike I have. But you take the two countersunk self-tapping screws, and they go through the connector cover, through the PCB and into the screen surround. Then we're going to take our screen and feed these two ribbon cables through, and it should just fit nice and snug in there, and your ribbon cable should come through the back like this, and nice and easy to connect those to the ports on the PCB we already fitted. They're quite fiddly, so just take your time and yeah, make sure they're fitted properly. Pull the clip down and give them a little tug. You won't be able to pull them too hard without pulling them out anyway, but you know, as long as they feel nice and secure, then you know they're in place. Same thing on the bottom here. This one can be a bit tight. It's quite a thick piece of ribbon cable, but just push it in. I think you can have a tiny little amount of pins still sticking out the bottom. That's just like it is on the original camera as well. Don't worry about it. So nothing to worry about there. Just push that one in and clip it down. Now you might find that there's a little bit of play in the screen here, so there's a really quick and easy way to fix that. Insulation tape. So I'm going to do this really roughly, but you could do it nice and neat. Basically just peel off a bit of insulation tape that's about the length of the top of the screen, like so. And the insulation tape is too wide, so we're going to split it down the middle, and this is where I can't be bothered to cut through it all, so I'm just going to tear it really roughly. So now you have these two more narrow strips of insulation tape, and you can just fit those over the edge. So there's a bit of there's an edge all the way around the screen that doesn't show any video, so just make sure you don't go over that edge, otherwise you're going to see the tape behind you. You're going to have tape coming out from underneath the carbon fiber. So generally speaking, you won't need to do this. The screens will fit quite nice and snug, but just in case, fit those two bits of tape and then fit the carbon plate on the front. We're going to be then use countersunk bolts to secure these two plates. I haven't actually fitted the threaded inserts to this print at this time, but obviously there'll be threaded inserts there, and you just go round and fit the 4 countersunk bolts like on this finished one here. These slots are for fitting this small rig sunshade. The screen on the Blackmagic is only 500 nits, so as soon as you go outside and show it any sunlight, it's basically unusable without some sort of a visor. So yeah, I created these lugs to fit this sunshade, which is designed for the Atomos Ninja. And obviously you have your screen extension cable, and yeah, there's just a nice complete finished unit really. Okay, that's the end of the build guide. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I've made everything really nice and clear and explained everything along the way, and hopefully you don't think it's too difficult or over the top. Personally, to make the camera what I wanted it to be, I had to do these extra steps with the extra PCBs and all the ribbon cables. It's really not that complicated at all. It might seem a bit complicated, but really it's as simple as it can be, and I really feel that the finished product at the end of it is well worth the effort. But if you have any questions or you get any problems along the way, I'd rather you contact me and ask me any questions, big or small, and ask for help at any stage. I'm always available. I might not be able to respond like instantly, but if you get stuck, just put it all down and wait for a reply. Don't take any chances, because these things they're pretty easy to break if you don't know what you're doing. Even when you know what you're doing, they're pretty easy to break, to be honest, if you're a bit of an idiot sometimes, which I am. So yeah, hope you like the new kit. Can't wait to see it in action. Laters.